In the 6 years of marketing work that I've done, in which I have directed work for people twice my age, companies making about $1 million per year to $300 million per year have allowed me to direct marketing work for them so that I can make them even many more millions. But also as my current work as a chief marketing officer at a K-12 virtual school, I've come to believe that competition across companies doesn't really happen in the market. It actually happens in the prospect's mind. In this particular video, I'm going to share with you a framework that I use anytime that I'm working with a company that is not the market leader, but it's trying to get themselves in the minds of the prospect. So when they think, for example, of virtual school, they don't think about their competitor, they actually think about them. But what do I even mean by competition happens in the prospect's minds? It doesn't really matter if you have the best teachers, if you have the best track record achieving particular results. For example, in our case, we have 35 years of experience actually getting kids who are disengaged, anxious, stressed, and getting them into just loving life, loving to learn, loving to do projects on their own, and then go on to do fantastic things. It doesn't really matter that we have achieved those things. It doesn't really matter what you have achieved and the incredible things that, for example, your EdTech has, like the efficiency that it allows, the fact that, teachers can host multiple classes at the same time. It doesn't really matter. What matters the most is if a prospect thinks about your category, let's say a virtual school, do they think about you? Here's how first in the mind looks like in practice. And there are two ways to be first in the mind. So the first one is simply, when people think about the category, they think about you. So for example, there are people who, when they think about a camera, they think about Kodak. When they think about ketchup, they think about Heinz. When they think about tissues, they think about Kleenex. The case with Kleenex is actually even more incredible because people think about Kleenex when they think about tissues, regardless of whether I call Kleenex or not. I don't know how it happens or whether it happens in the US, but in Colombia, which is the place in which I'm from, people just call Kleenex anything that is a tissue. So again, the very first example we have is you're just first in the category. People think about the category, you think about you. Now, because I said that what matters in competition is not what you have or how better you are, but simply the first brand that comes to mind. This means that if you're not Kleenex, Heinz, or Kodak, you're done. Like, there's nothing else to do. But fortunately, if you're not the market leader and you didn't get first to the category, you have option two, which is you think about an empty space within the prospect's mind, and then you go ahead and actually place yourself there. So you're not first in the category, but first within the sub-niche. And here's how this looks like. Pizzas within the US, especially, I think it was Pizza Hut, the one that was first within the category of places where you could actually dine in and have pizza on. Also, the pan-based pizza was also very appealing. So when people thought about pizza, especially dine-in, they thought about Pizza Hut. But what happens once you go a little bit deeper within the category and you think about takeout? Maybe, like me, what you think about is actually Little Caesars, pizza spot where you can just go in, you order your pizza, and then just take it back home. Thirdly, you might think about another chain when you're thinking about pizza, which is Domino's. And what do you think about when you think about Domino's? Well, if you're like me, you probably think about delivery. So this is just a simple example of you might not be the first one to be in a particular category. There's still a chance for you to compete within a subcategory. One of the ways in which Domino's in the last century has been able to, well, first of all, actually compete with Pizza Hut, that was the first large pizza chain, was to focus on delivery. And they've been focusing so much on it that as of today, they're actually the top chain. We know that competition happens within the customer minds, or at least that's my hypothesis. And you can either be first within the category or you can be first within the sub-niche. But the important thing is that you cannot be better, because there's no better. There's only spots in people's minds that you have to fill in. Now, my school, so that I can show you exactly the framework by which, if you're not the market leader, you can go ahead and actually fill up a space that is empty within the customer's minds. And I'll tell you one of the methods that I usually follow, which is my virtual K-12 school. So in the market, there are already companies that people think about when they think about virtual schools, or at least some people. So there's two ways to do this. I can either go against them, but for the sake of this example, I'm gonna add a caveat, which is that I don't really think there's one given school that when people think about virtual schools, they think about them. They're still fairly new within the US, and you can actually challenge me on this. And that's the first step. Because marketing is a competition that happens in the minds of customers. You first have to define your competitor, which I just did. Second thing you have to do is actually define their strengths. One of the best ways to actually choose how to compete and find a space in the mind of the customer is to think about the strength of your main competitor. In the case of this example in which I'm a virtual K-12 school and I'm choosing the physical local school as my competitor, one of the reasons why people don't choose us, but they choose them, is actually the fact that they're physical. So when people think about virtual schools, at times they think about lack of socialization, no sports, my kid is going to be antisocial, they're not going to know how to talk, they're going to be at the house all day, they're going to be addicted to video games, so on and so forth. So when they think about physical schools, they think about the flip side, which is, oh, my kid is probably talking to people, they're having fun, they're playing games. Now, we know that that's not the actual story, and parents actually know that. And think as parents that simply you're a prospect. Within that strength of physicality, you also have other issues, such as, well, if you have an important job that you could take, an opportunity as a parent, you usually have to think about destroying your kid's social life. So that's tricky. There's also commute. There's also all the things that happen within traditional physical schools, such as bullying, fights, people are just flirting on the VAG rather than studying. Classrooms tend to be quite full, and there's little to none one-on-one customization or mentorship because there's one teacher for 20, 30, 40 students at a time. And the important thing to keep in mind in this example is a physical school cannot really fix these things without stopping to be a physical school. So this particular strength of them being physical is also a weakness. And it's a weakness because, for example, you cannot eliminate commute time without being a physical school. You cannot stop your kids from only interacting with people from specific neighborhoods rather than them talking to people all over the world unless they stop being physical. So step number one, whenever you're trying to place a brand within the customer's minds, is define your top competition. Second one is think about all the strengths that they have and think about one that you want to focus on. In this particular case, I'm thinking as a virtual school, I'm thinking, the main strength that physical schools usually have is that they're physical. Now, the great thing is that, as I just told you, there are a lot of associations that people already have to physical schools and all the issues that they have with them. And in those threads and those bits of information is where we will start brainstorming how to find one single message or one single angle by which we can not say how great we are, but actually remind people of the associations they already have of the bad things that happen in their competitors. I mentioned bullying, anxiety, commute time, and all of those. Again, the reason to think about what people think about rather than you going through an individual exercise of, let's name our value propositions or our mission and how cool we are, is that regardless of what you think, what matters the most in marketing is what people already think. You cannot spend millions of dollars changing people's minds, or usually you cannot. And because you cannot, what you have to look for is what's the strength in our competition that they cannot give up, that is connected to a strength that we have or to something that people can know us for. And then let's just drill it down over and over and over again. For the sake of this example, we're going to go to step 3, which is we have our competitor, we define a strength that has a weakness, and now we're going to explore angles by which we can attack it. And I actually wrote a few things. So for this example, there's this particular angle of life first flexibility. So local presence creates time and place lock-in, fixed schedules, commutes, immobility, and narrow peers. The leader cannot actually fix this without stopping to be a physical school. One of the ways in which we can prove this is, for example, our shadow days, which are free trial classes in which we can have a kid join class. And why do I say that that's one of the ways in which we can prove this? Well, for 2 reasons. You want a single message that you're going to attack or a single position that you're going to take. In this case would be life first flexibility, which goes against the strength, which is the physicality of schools. But also you want to prove what you're saying. And the way in which we're going to prove that to parents that what they believe it's a weakness within physical school is actually true is by inviting them to one of our free trial classes. And you might be thinking, why is this the case? Well, parents join on their own time. Kids actually participate in class immediately because it's actually one of our actual classes. And they start realizing that they can participate, that they can have fun. Usually they make friends. And what happens after a lot of shadow days is that the kid goes, can I do this again? Now, I don't want to go into a product conversation, but you got to keep in mind that I can only prove the downsides of physical school because my offer and my product, which is a school and my service, is actually delivering on the promise that kids are just going to have a way more fantastic time in class than they have in physical school. And that has all sorts of benefits, which I'm ignoring right now, because remember, the thing is not benefits, it's actually prospects' minds. However, the Shadow Day only works as a way to prove the physical lock-in of schools by helping kids go through an environment in which they're going to ask, can we please do this again? You know, I was walking back to the house today, and I wrote this down. And again, this is not perfect marketing copy, but I thought, hey, I like this idea about life first flexibility, which is flexibility in terms of schedules, flexibility for the parents, they can move whatever, flexibility over the kid, being able to just pursue their own interests, but also meet people from all over the world. And I thought about our Shadow Days as the one way in which we're going to prove this. And as a marketing message, I just thought, well, you can keep your home, keep your job, keep your child's spark. It's not perfect. It's 3 messages technically, even though they're all connected to life first flexibility, but it's more narrow and more focused than previous messages that we've had where, for example, we're talking about the agency that kids build within our school, how happy they become, the fact that we have kids going to Stanford, making 6 figures, directing films, and all those sorts of things. Again, keep your home, keep your job, keep your child spark. It's not a perfect marketing message, but what he's better at compared to the others that I just said is that you think the competitor has this particular strengths, but you also associate weaknesses to it, and we're just reminding you of them through, for example, the message that I just shared: keep your home, keep your job, keep your child spark, but also through giving them one specific way in which they will be able to prove to themselves or validate the concerns that they feel they have with competitors. So as of right now, we have 3 steps, and I actually started talking about the 4th. So you identify the competitor, you identify their strengths so that you can think about a weakness that they cannot solve, and then you actually, let's say, come up with an angle or hypothesis by which, through a single message and a single stance, you could not only reinforce the issues that people already associate to your competitor, but also, of course, gain an opportunity to prove it. And once you have that opportunity, you go into step 4, which is, well, basically think about how you will prove it. And here are some of the ways in which that might work for us, or how we will not only prove this, but also test whether this positioning actually works for us. So the first one I already talked about. We have one single offer. We're not going to be marketing our kindergarten, our upper elementary, our grade 12, our Socratic Parenting Mastermind, and all the suite of products that we have. Rather than that, what we can do is actually just market one thing, which is our Shadow Days. The Shadow Days work, as I said, because they're actually proven consistently to parents and to kids what they already know, which is, I hate school and I just want to be in a better one. But here are other ways in which we can actually take advantage of this position and actually test if through these particular actions, we're not only able to get ourselves in the customer mind, but also just test if this is the way in which we want to do it. So let's just start only publishing content on social media that dives into this particular point of life first flexibility, which is going against the weakness of what I call the happiness tax of going to a local school. As of today, for example, I think it was last month. Well, actually it was like 2 weeks ago. I started switching gears on a lot of the content what we were doing and focusing more about this particular positioning. As of right now, I really don't have a lot of data, as you will also not have data once you come up with the way in which you will attack your competitor. But the important thing is that you got to start taking bets. And the way in which I'm taking bets, for example, is that I'm only posting content that can be fairly connected to this idea of the physical lock-in and the happiness tax. Because I'm currently attracting about 500,000 to 700,000 people to our virtual school. After a month, maybe a month and a half, I should have enough data by which I could say, hey, are we coming up more often in people's minds? And I can measure that through the number of inquiries that we're having, social media comments, calls that we're getting for people who want to join a free shadow class, and all sorts of ways. And this will all depend on how your particular business is set up. And the third way, and this is like the essence of the message that I've been trying to communicate, is that all in all, I'm going to be talking less about me and more about my competition. Not necessarily naming people, not necessarily saying, hey, these people are bad and we're better because of X, Y, and Z. And here's how we solve your pains better. It's how we help you achieve your dreams better. How we help you, do these things that you want to do better. I'm not going to get into better competitions. But what I can do and what you can do after having named your competitor, identify their strength, come up with a way in which you can highlight the weakness within that strength, and then finding out one way in which you will recurrently prove this weakness is to actually just talk about that thing and nothing else. Not talk about benefits. In my case, talk less about, the fantastic kids we have that make way more money than I do. Talk less about the fact that we've been refining this educational model for the last 35 years. Talk less about how our own team is recurrently consulting people building new schools at all times that others associate to competitors, but it's like, we're actually helping them. Talk less about how cool we are and simply talk more about competitors. Talk more about what people think when they think about competitors. And more importantly, think about a very narrow space in people's minds that we can own. In the case of our school, one of the places that we could hold, because there are many of them, might be just happiness meets excellence. That's one of the positioning statements that I once mentioned. And it's just this idea of there's a happiness tax that people are paying every single day by studying in physical school that gets relieved when they come into a virtual environment like ours. Now, finally, one of the last things you want to do once you go through all these steps is to realize that this is going to be a test. This is going to be something that you're refining. So for example, I wrote some of the things that I find as weaknesses within everything that I've shared with you. Attacking physical schools is quite fussy. Usually I like to think about one competitor, but my gut reaction is that there's none. And my consultant side is like, there's no way, there's none. When I talk about happiness, I really struggle because part of me believes that even though there's not an empty space, someone could come try to claim it. And that's another point in itself. Like, I don't want to get into a competitor war, into a better war based on who's better at getting kids happy. So that's another concern. And also there's a product conversation to have about, we have to design shadow days in a way in which kids themselves are not only telling parents like, hey, I want to do this again, but like reinforcing it over and over again. But the important thing is that with these 5 steps, I think it was 5 steps that I mentioned, you can go ahead from being completely unknown to actually exploring one of the best ways that I've found after 6 years of directing work to actually stop going into all sorts of competitions about whose value proposition is better and just actually thinking, people already think this. Why am I changing their minds? Why am I not instead just either becoming first in something that they usually think about, but they cannot think about any company when they think about it? Or I choose a very specific sub niche within that category and I go full at it.